Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 26th. Today, we remember a pioneering seedsman out of Rockford, Illinois, whose company became the world's largest mail-order seed company. And we'll also learn about the Irish playwright and critic who had a unique writing hut in his garden. We recognize the botanist who botanized in Yellowstone for an entire summer. And we'll also revisit some July folklore in Unearthed Words. We grow that garden library with a book about the history of indoor plants by one of my favorite authors. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of an English writer and politician who used humor in his work. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners from around the world in today's curated news. Well, first up is a post that Danny Perkins shared in the group. It's kind of a sad post. He showed a picture of his beautiful echinacea, and then he wrote this. The Japanese beetles were efficient in removing all of the petals from these echinacea, but they didn't steal their beauty. Now all that's left of Danny's echinacea are the orangey brown seed heads. And I wrote Danny back and said, now they're alliums, because that's how they look. They look like large brown alliums. Now, it's heartbreaking to deal with damage from Japanese beetles, but I agree with Danny. They didn't steal the beauty of his echinacea. Now, if you'd like to see what I'm talking about, just head on over to the Facebook group for the show and type in the word beetles, and Danny's post will pop up. Now, also in the Facebook group for the show, I posed a question last week, and it was, what is your favorite shrub and why? Deborah Anderson Laturza said, I have a few favorites, but if I had to pick just one, it would have to be the red twig dogwood. Such a beauty all year long. The stems are green in the spring and summer, but bright red when it loses its leaves in the fall. And the birds like it too, because it has berries that follow the blossoms. And then, of course, she likes to cut some of the stems and put them in her Christmas tree to add interest. And I love to use the stems in all of my Christmas pots. So, Deborah, I agree with you. That's a great choice. In fact, it's a reminder to me that I want to plant some of that up here at the cabin. I want to plant curly willow and red twig dogwood. And I'm doing all of that with my containers in mind. Meanwhile, Sue Luftig and Debbie Gibson both have a soft spot for forsythia, the beautiful yellow vernal shrub, the springtime shrub. And Sue writes, it's so underrated and so willing to give. And here's a reminder, if you do have forsythia, make sure to prune out about 1/3 of the branches after it's done blooming. Danny Perkins and Julia Cloth both vote for the panicle hydrangea, and Danny shared a picture of his fire and ice, which he says is wonderful this time of year, and it is. And he also points out that it adds interest in winter. Now, the fire and ice variety that Danny is growing has a combination of pink and white blossoms, thus the name Fire and Ice. And finally, Meredith Frazier is a fan of winter Daphne because it smells so good in February. Well, Meredith is correct, and that's why the official name for the plant is Daphne odora. Daphnes have pink buds that emerge in February to March, and they become clusters of fragrant, beautiful blossoms. Now, Daphne shrubs can be grown in the United States in zones 4 to 9. They like a well-drained soil, they love compost, and they need neutral to acidic soil pH. Now, I do have a little warning for you about Daphne. All parts of Daphne are poisonous. the bark, the foliage, the flowers, and the berries. So keep that in mind if you have pets or little kids. All right, that's it for today's Gardener Greetings. To participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pics, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. That's Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. Or you can also just go ahead and share things in the Facebook group for the show. And while you're at home, don't forget that you can ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast. If you want to hear the latest episode, just ask for the latest episode of the Daily Gardener podcast. And then when you're done with that episode, you can say, play next episode. And she will. It's just that easy. Here's today's curated news. Well, for today's show, I picked a post from Stephanie Rose over at Garden Therapy, and her post was about how to grow and care for blueberry bushes for buckets of sweet blueberries, and I would add, for year-round interest. Here's an excerpt. Blueberries are easy to grow. They look beautiful in the garden. They taste fabulous, and they're well known to be good for you. If you have just a bit of space and some sun, plant a blueberry bush or two as gorgeous landscaping, and then enjoy the many benefits of sun-ripened berries picked straight from your garden. And here are a few health benefits of blueberries. Blueberries are low on the glycemic index, so they don't cause your blood sugar to spike. They're considered to be very nutritious. You get lots of fiber, vitamins, and minerals from blueberries. And studies show that they actually help improve memory. In addition to that, they help lower blood pressure. And interestingly enough, they're closely related to cranberries. They can actually help prevent urinary tract infections. Now, Stephanie goes on to talk about my favorite aspect of blueberry plants, and that is their year-round interest. She says, add a few blueberry plants to your landscape for their white, bell-shaped blooms in the spring, and then the bright globes of blue in the summer. It's really beautiful to see a blueberry bush loaded with blueberries. And then she writes, the real show happens in the late fall when the bushes turn bright red, neon pink, orange, or red purple. And I couldn't agree more. Blueberry bushes make a great edible alternative to short-growing shrubs like boxwood. Imagine a row of blueberries lining the fence, and how many berries you will have. And then she adds, you know garden-grown food always tastes better than grocery store bought food. And she's right yet again. And I am such a huge blueberry plant fan that I put 3 of them right outside my front door back in Maple Grove. Now, next summer will be their 3rd summer, and I'm so excited to see their growth. They do take a while to get established, but once they do, you're ready to rock and roll. So if you have a spot in your garden and you're wondering what you should put in it, consider the blueberry. Beautiful spring blossoms, beautiful summer fruit, gorgeous drop-dead fall foliage. It's hard to beat that combination. Well, before I close out the gardening news segment, I want to remind you to work early in your garden so that you can stay cool. Here at the cabin, I want to avoid the high temperatures, and it's been so humid. I want to not get sunburned, and I don't want to get bug bites. So I go out early in the morning, and then I work for no more than 2 hours. And I make it a point to wrap up no later than 10 a.m. And during the dog days of summer, I'm such a baby. I want to share with you what I do to stay cool outside and to have what I consider to be the best self-care I can give myself. First, if I'm working in a sunny area of the garden, I set up a big sports umbrella. It's about 6 to 8 feet in diameter, and then that gives me plenty of shade, plenty of protection for both the plants and for myself as I'm working. Then I have a 100-foot extension cord, and attached to that, I have a huge fan, and I drag that all around the garden. It helps me keep cool, but it also does one other thing. It helps keep the bugs away. And as I always remind my kids, mosquitoes are terrible flyers. So if you're ever out on a windy day, the reason you don't get bit is because they just can't navigate. They can't fly effectively in those conditions. Now, it's too bad that the wind kicks up allergies, but the one plus is that it does keep the bugs away. In any case, keep this in mind as you're going out to the garden during the dog days. Try not to overdo it, and try to up your self-care when you're going out there. There's no reason why your time in the garden can't be made more comfortable during the hottest time of the year. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out any of my curated news articles or original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. And by the way, if you're looking for today's curated article on blueberries, all you have to do is search for the word blueberry and Stephanie's post will pop up. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the pioneering seedsman out of Rockford, Illinois, Roland Hallet Shumway, who always went by his initials RH. The RH Shumway Seed Company became the world's largest mail-order seed company, and their Marketmore seeds were especially popular. And I thought you'd get a kick out of knowing that some of their most famous customers included Bing Crosby and Perry Como. Now, when Roland was 19, he enlisted in the Army to serve in the Civil War. Unfortunately, he contracted bronchitis and he became totally deaf during his service. And one time, Roland was asked how he would like to be remembered. He gave a 3-word response: good seeds cheap. Roland said that he wanted to make sure, quote, that good seeds were within reach of the poorest planters. As with any venture, hustle and heart drove Roland's success. Roland said, from the beginning of the new year until after spring planting, my employees work 16 hours a day, and myself and my family 18 or more hours per day. Are we not surely knights at labor? How can we do more? Do we not deserve the patronage of every planter in America? By 1905, Roland donated land in Rockford for the Shumway market on the condition that the city would preserve the farmers' market in perpetuity, quote, for the benefit of all, and the poor especially. The market ran year-round on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and this was the place for farmers and people to gather to sell their fruits, vegetables, and flowers. In the 1980s, Shumway seed was sold, and today the area behind the market building is a parking lot. And today is the birthday of the Irish playwright and critic George Bernard Shaw, who was born on this day in 1856. In 1906, when George was 50 years old, he and his wife Charlotte bought an ivy-covered brick country house set on almost 4 acres of land, and it ultimately became known as Shaw's Corner in Ayotte, St. Lawrence. And for over 4 decades, George wrote most of his work in his tiny writing shed in the garden at Shaw's Corner. Both Pygmalion and Heartbreak House were created in George's little writing hut. Now, when George worked in his little hut, he sat in a straight-back wicker chair, and he wrote using a black typewriter that was positioned on a little shelf desk attached to the wall in the corner. George could communicate with the outside world using a wall-mounted phone that was above the desk. The hut had windows on the front and back sides, and there was a little bed built into the side opposite the desk. Now, George wouldn't have had much room to move around other than to get to his desk, stand up, turn around, and then lie on his bed. It was all very modest and humble, except that his little summer house had a unique feature to distinguish itself. It was built on top of a revolving platform. This ingenious device made it so that the little hut could be turned to look at the garden throughout the day. Now, when the Shaws first bought the property, there really wasn't much there except for open land. Over the years, Charlotte and George worked to transform the place into a sanctuary of sorts. At first, the Shaws split time between Shaw's Corner and their London house. But as they grew older, they gravitated more and more to Shaw's Corner. The Shaws loved their garden, and from family records, we know that the Shaws especially loved delphiniums, iris, and tulips. And every day, George and Charlotte would walk around the garden together every morning, and they'd keep a tally of the number of kilometers they walked by adding a stone to a pile in the garden. And at the age of 94, George was still actively gardening until his unexpected death after a fall. George had been pruning a tree, and he slipped off the ladder. After George and Charlotte died, their ashes were spread in the garden over the paths that they had walked together so many times. And ever since his death, in honor of his July birthday, performances of George's plays are put on in his garden. And it was George Bernard Shaw who said all of these wonderful gardening quotes. I have found, after a good deal of consideration, that the best place to seek God is in a garden. You can dig for him there. And he also wrote, gardening is the only unquestionably useful job. And then here's 2 more. The planting of a tree is a modest form of immortality and one of the few truly long-term expressions of hope to mortal human beings. And then this one. Except during the 9 months before he draws his first breath, no man manages his affairs as well as a tree does. And today is the 121st anniversary of the 14-week botanical expedition through Yellowstone that was led by the botanist Avon Nelson on this day in 1899. Avon had hired a student named Leslie Gooding to be the chore boy for the expedition, and he was paid $10 per month. The expedition team assembled at the University of Wyoming, where Avon was a new teacher. Leslie remembered the excitement on campus at the prospect of going on the trek, saying, some 3 or 4 months were to be spent in Yellowstone Park collecting plants. Many students were anxious to accompany Dr. Nelson on the expedition, and they were willing to work for nothing just to see the park. This was in the days when autos were much like hen's teeth, and trips through the park by stage were expensive. Now, the euphemism hen's teeth refers to something being extremely rare, since hens have no teeth, and it implies something that is so scarce it's virtually non-existent. So during the time of Avon's expedition, there were basically no automobiles. Now, in addition to Leslie, another botany student named Elias Nelson, no relation to Avon, joined the group. And it was on this day, back in 1899, that Leslie and Elias had gone collecting near an area called Artist Paint Pots. It's a dangerous area with over 50 springs, geysers, vents, and mud pots. Geothermal features are some of the deadliest natural features in Yellowstone, but people often fail to realize that fact. And to this day, park rangers rescue 1 or 2 visitors who fall from boardwalks or wander off designated paths and then punch their feet through the thin earthen crust into boiling water. Yet, drawn by curiosity, Elias ignored the warning signs that were present and went off the path, and he suddenly found himself with one leg sunk into boiling mud. Well, he managed to free himself, and Avon's wife did what she could with soda and flour to bandage his wounds, and the doctor at the nearest town recommended Elias return home for treatment. Despite the challenges posed by Yellowstone, Avon Nelson and his team collected roughly 30,000 specimens, although only about 500 specimens were represented. It turns out Avon had purposely gathered 20 to 30 duplicates per species because he correctly assumed that institutions and collectors would want specimens from Yellowstone. And today, Avon is remembered as the father of Wyoming botany, but his greatest legacy is the Rocky Mountain Herbarium, created from Avon's collection of Yellowstone plants. In unearthed words, here are some words from July folklore. Never trust a July sky, or never trust the sky in the month of July. As July, so next January. And if the 1st of July be rainy weather, it will rain more or less for 3 weeks together. Here's one I like. If anthills are high in July, the coming winter will be hard. And here's a funny one. Whatever July and August do not boil, September cannot fry. Then these last 2 are about the corn. No tempest, good July, lest the corn look ruly. I guess ruly was supposed to rhyme with July. And then finally, here's one we all know. Corn should be knee-high by the 4th of July. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Once Upon a Windowsill by Tova Martin, one of my favorite garden writers. This book came out in 1988, and the subtitle is A History of Indoor Plants. This book is an oldie but goodie. Tova Martin is a fanatical and passionate organic gardener, and she's the author of so many of my favorites: The Indestructible Houseplant, The Unexpected Houseplant, The New Terrarium, oh, so good, and Tasha Tudor's Garden, as well as many other gardening books. You can visit her website at tovamartin.com. Now, this book is 312 pages of how plants moved indoors, coupled with plant lore, plant culture and the evolution of our relationship with plants. All topics I love. You can get a copy of Once Upon a Windowsill by Tova Martin and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $30. And finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the English writer and politician Winthrop Mackworth Praed, who's remembered for his humorous verse. He was born on this day in 1839. One of my favorite Praed sayings is, I remember how my childhood fleeted by, the mirth of its December and the warmth of its July. And history tells us that at his home, Winthrop had a fine grove with beautiful grounds that overlooked a harbor. And at one point, he even built an orangery. Sadly, Winthrop died young, at the age of 37, from tuberculosis. Yet, for many years, his fans delighted in sharing this little story about him, and I thought you would enjoy it as well. Now, just remember that we're talking about Winthrop Mackworth Praed. Here goes. A man went to a bookshop and he asked, "Have you Browning?" And the clerk replied, "No, we can't sell him. People say they can't understand him." Then the customer asked, "Have you prayed?" And the clerk said, "Yes, we've prayed, and we can't understand him." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow. And famous Shumway seed customers included Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby. Okay, here we go. And I thought you'd get a kick out of knowing that some of their most famous customers included Bing Crosby, included Bing Cosby, included Bing Crosby, included Bing Crosby, and Perry Como.